I watched my wife read 7 friend rules and call our marriage pathetic. I set one final boundary, split accounts, closed doors, and ended the marriage. Everything? Well, this wasn't one of those. This conversation started with my wife slamming her fork down on her dinner plate and declaring that she should have listened to her friends, 7 pieces of advice, and now she was stuck in a pathetic marriage with me. Yeah, just like that. No warm-up, no lead-in, just straight to the throat. I was sitting there halfway through what I thought was a decent Tuesday night dinner when she launched into this speech that sounded like it had been rehearsed. She looked me dead in the eye and said those exact words from the title. The way she said pathetic marriage with such venom, you'd think I'd been beating her or cheating on her for years. But no, my biggest crime was apparently being the guy she chose to marry. She didn't stop there. Oh no, she was just getting started. She began counting on her fingers like she was presenting a business case to fire the CEO. 7 pieces of advice, she repeated, and I ignored every single one because I thought I knew better, because I thought you were different, because I thought this would work out somehow. The way she said somehow made it clear that our 5-year marriage had been nothing but a cosmic accident that she was finally ready to correct. I kept eating, mainly because I wasn't sure what else to do with my hands, but also because I had a feeling this was going to be a long performance and I might need the energy. She started pacing around the dining room, which, in our modest house, meant she was basically walking in circles around the table where I was still sitting every few seconds. She'd stop, point at me, and shake her head like she was looking at the biggest disappointment of her life. And maybe she was. Maybe that's exactly what I had become in her mind. You want to know what they told me? She asked, but it wasn't really a question. She was going to tell me whether I wanted to hear it or not. They told me things that could have saved me from this situation, from being trapped here with someone who clearly isn't what I need. Trapped. That word hit different. Not unhappy, not frustrated, not even angry. Trapped. Like I was some kind of prison warden, and she was an innocent victim who had stumbled into my cell by mistake. The irony wasn't lost on me, considering I was the one who had been working my tail off to keep this household running while she spent her days complaining to these friends about how terrible her life was. She kept going, building up steam like a train leaving the station. Every single one of them saw things I was too blind to see. Every single one of them tried to warn me, and I just smiled and nodded and thought I knew better. Well, guess what? They were right about everything. I finally looked up from my plate and asked the question that seemed obvious. So, what exactly did they tell you? The smile that crossed her face wasn't friendly. It was the kind of smile you see right before someone tells you exactly how stupid they think you are. Oh, now you're interested. Now you want to hear what people think about this marriage, about you. I set my fork down and leaned back in my chair. Something about her tone told me this wasn't going to be a quick conversation. This felt like an ambush that had been months in planning, and I was just now realizing I was the target. She pulled out her phone and actually started reading from what looked like notes. Notes about our marriage, about me. She had prepared for this conversation like it was a presentation at work, complete with talking points and supporting evidence. That's when I knew this wasn't just another argument. This was an execution. Number 1, she began, holding up her index finger like she was teaching a kindergarten class. Never marry your first serious boyfriend. That was what she told me right after you proposed. She said I needed more experience, more perspective, more options before settling down. She paused to let that sink in, watching my face for a reaction. I didn't give her one. Not yet. Number 2, never marry a man who can't provide the lifestyle you want immediately, she said. Waiting for potential was just setting myself up for disappointment and resentment. Another pause, another expectant look. I was starting to see the pattern here. Should I continue? She asked, but again it wasn't really a question. She was going to go through all 7 whether I wanted to hear them or not. This was her moment, her chance to download years of accumulated frustration and blame it all on my failure to be psychic about what her friends thought our marriage should look like. I gestured for her to continue. If she wanted to burn the house down, she might as well use all the gasoline she'd brought to the party. She didn't need any more encouragement. My wife launched into the remaining 5 pieces of advice, like she was reading from a gospel that could have saved her soul if only she'd been smart enough to listen. Number 3, she continued, now walking back and forth behind my chair, so I had to turn around to see her. Never give up your own apartment when you move in together. Keep your independence. Keep your options open. Keep a place to go when things get tough. I almost laughed at that one. The same woman who had insisted we get a joint bank account 3 months into dating was now lecturing me about independence. The same woman who had practically moved into my place after our second date was suddenly an advocate for maintaining separate living spaces. Number 4. Never ever take on the traditional wife roles unless he's taking on the traditional husband roles. No cooking, no cleaning, no managing the household unless he's bringing home enough money to justify it. That one stung a little, not because it hurt my feelings, but because it revealed something I hadn't quite put together before. All those times she'd complained about doing laundry or cooking dinner. All those little comments about feeling like a maid, they hadn't been spontaneous frustrations. They'd been talking points fed to her by her advisory committee. Number 5, she said, and now she was standing directly in front of me, phone in hand like she was delivering a legal verdict. Never marry someone without having more experiences first. Travel alone, date other people. Figure out what you actually want before you settle for what's convenient. Settle for what's convenient. That's what our 5-year marriage had been to her. Convenient, not love, not partnership, not building something together, just the path of least resistance that she'd somehow stumbled down because she was too inexperienced to know better. Number 6. Never marry a man who expects you to contribute equally to expenses when you're not earning equally. The man should cover the major costs, and anything you contribute should be considered a bonus, not an obligation. I had to process that one for a second. We'd always split everything proportionally based on our incomes. I made more, so I paid more. It seemed fair to both of us, or at least I thought it did. Apparently, I was wrong. Apparently, any contribution she made to our household was an act of charity that I should have been grateful for, not an equal partnership. And number 7, she said, her voice getting louder like she was building to a crescendo. Never marry someone without having a backup plan. Always keep your options open. Always have an exit strategy. Always maintain relationships that could lead somewhere better. There it was. The backup plan. The exit strategy. The relationships that could lead somewhere better. Everything about our marriage suddenly made a lot more sense. The late nights out with friends, the secret phone calls, the way she'd started dressing differently when she went out without me. She hadn't been living in our marriage. She'd been conducting a 5-year audition for my replacement. She put her phone down and crossed her arms, looking at me like a prosecutor who had just presented overwhelming evidence to a jury. So, there you have it. 7 pieces of advice that could have saved me from this situation. 7 warnings that I chose to ignore because I thought I was in love. Thought she was in love. Past tense. Another little knife twisted just right to make sure it hit all the important spots. And now, here I am, she continued. Stuck in a marriage with someone who can't provide what I need. Can't give me the life I deserve. Can't even understand why I'm frustrated because you're too comfortable with mediocrity to see how much potential I've wasted on this relationship. Mediocrity, wasted potential. The hits just kept coming. I sat there for a moment, letting all 7 pieces of advice sink in. 7 different ways I had apparently failed to measure up to the standards her friends had set for her life. 7 different reasons why our marriage was a mistake that needed to be corrected. But here's the thing about listening to someone systematically destroy everything you thought you'd built together. It gives you a lot of clarity about where you actually stand. And where I stood, according to the woman I'd married, was somewhere between disappointing and pathetic. She was still standing there, arms crossed, waiting for me to respond, waiting for me to defend myself, or apologize, or beg her to reconsider, waiting for me to prove her point about mediocrity by reacting exactly the way a mediocre man would react to having his failures cataloged so thoroughly. But I didn't do any of those things. Instead, I asked her a simple question. So, what do you want to do about it? The question caught her off guard. She'd been prepared for anger or hurt feelings or desperate attempts to convince her she was wrong. She hadn't been prepared for calm acceptance of the situation she'd just described. What do you mean? She asked. I mean exactly what I said. You've just explained to me that our marriage is a mistake, that I'm not what you need, and that you've wasted 5 years of your potential on someone who can't give you the life you deserve. So what do you want to do about it? She opened her mouth to answer, then closed it again. For the first time since this conversation started, she didn't seem to have her response prepared. The silence stretched between us for what felt like 10 minutes, but was probably only 30 seconds. She kept opening and closing her mouth, like she was trying to find words that had suddenly escaped her vocabulary. This wasn't part of her script. She'd planned the attack, but apparently hadn't thought through what would happen after she dropped all 7 bombs. I don't know, she finally stammered. I hadn't really thought about what comes next. I just needed you to understand how I feel. how trapped I've been feeling. That's when something clicked for me. She hadn't thought about what comes next because this whole speech wasn't about finding solutions. It was about making me feel as small and inadequate as she'd apparently been feeling. It was about transferring her dissatisfaction from her shoulders to mine, making her unhappiness my responsibility to fix. I stood up slowly, clearing my plate from the table. "Well, that's interesting," I said, keeping my voice level. "You've spent all this time thinking about how wrong our marriage is, but no time thinking about how to make it right, or whether you even want to make it right." She followed me into the kitchen, and I could feel her energy change. The confidence she'd had while delivering her prepared remarks was starting to crack. "Of course I want to make it right. That's why I'm talking to you about this. That's why I'm being honest about what I need." I turned to face her, leaning against the sink. "No, you're being honest about what your friends think you should need. There's a difference. Don't try to turn this around on them," she snapped. "They're just looking out for me. They can see things I've been too close to see." "Like what exactly? What terrible things have they observed about our marriage that you've been blind to?" She started pacing again. But this time it looked less like a prosecutor making her case, and more like someone trying to remember lines she'd forgotten. Like the fact that you're content with ordinary. Like the fact that you don't push yourself to achieve more, to provide more, to be more. I nodded slowly. "So, your friends think I should be more ambitious, more successful, wealthier, presumably." "It's not about money," she said. But the way she said it told me it was absolutely about money. "It's about drive. It's about having goals beyond just getting by." "And what goals do you have?" I asked. "Beyond marrying someone who makes more money than I do." That stopped her pacing. "What do you mean?" "I mean, in all these conversations with your friends about how inadequate I am, what did you tell them about your own goals, your own ambitions, your own plans for contributing to this better life you think you deserve?" She stared at me like I'd asked her to solve advanced calculus in her head. "I contribute plenty to this relationship." "I'm not talking about what you contribute. I'm talking about what you want to achieve, what you want to build, what legacy you want to leave behind that doesn't depend on being married to someone who makes more money." The question hung in the air between us. I could see her struggling with it, not because it was hard to answer, but because she'd never really thought about it. Her entire framework for evaluating our marriage was based on what I wasn't providing, not on what she was creating. "That's not the point," she finally said. "The point is that I followed my heart instead of my head, and now I'm paying the price for that mistake." "Okay," I said. "So, you made a mistake. You married the wrong person for the wrong reasons. You ignored good advice from people who cared about you. You ended up in a situation that doesn't meet your needs or expectations." She nodded, seeming relieved that I was finally understanding her position. "So, the question remains," I continued. "What do you want to do about it? Because I'm hearing a lot about the problem, but nothing about the solution." "I want you to understand," she said. "I want you to acknowledge that things need to change. I want you to step up and be the husband I need you to be." There it was. The real agenda behind this whole performance. She didn't want to leave. She wanted to remake me. She wanted to use her friend's criticism as a crowbar to pry me into a different shape, to pressure me into becoming someone I'd never been and never wanted to be. "And if I can't be that person," I asked, "if I can't step up to meet these standards that your friends have set for my life?" She looked genuinely confused by the question. "What do you mean if you can't? Anyone can improve themselves if they really want to. Anyone can try harder, do better, be more successful." I smiled, but it wasn't a happy smile. "You're right. Anyone can try to be more successful. The question is whether I want to try to be more successful for you or for someone who actually appreciates what I already bring to the table." Now she looked worried. This wasn't the direction she'd expected the conversation to go. She'd expected resistance followed by capitulation, followed by promises to do better. She hadn't expected me to start questioning whether she was worth the effort. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying that maybe your friends were right about one thing. Maybe you did make a mistake. Maybe you did settle for something that doesn't make you happy. And maybe the best thing for both of us would be to fix that mistake." Her face went pale. "Fix it how?" "By giving you exactly what you said you wanted. Freedom from this pathetic marriage. Freedom to find someone who meets all 7 of your friends' criteria. Freedom to live the life you think you deserve, with someone who can actually provide it." She took a step back. "That's not what I meant. I don't want to end our marriage. I want to improve it." Based on standards set by people who aren't married to me, I pointed out. Based on advice from people who apparently think I'm not good enough for you. Based on requirements that were never part of our original agreement. The kitchen fell silent again, but this time the silence felt different. This time I was the one in control of the conversation. The next morning I woke up with a clarity I hadn't felt in months. She was still asleep when I got up, which was perfect because I had some things to take care of before she started her day. Amazing how a good night's sleep can help you process information and make decisions that seemed impossible the night before. I made my coffee, sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop, and started working through the list of changes that needed to happen. If she wanted to experience what life would be like following her friend's 7 pieces of advice, I was going to help her get the full experience. First stop, the bank. I logged into our joint accounts and started the process of separating our finances, not stealing, not hiding money, just creating the independence she'd apparently been craving all along. I moved my direct deposits to a new individual account and left enough in the joint account to cover her portion of the bills for the next month. Fair and clean. Next, I called our credit card companies. The cards where she was an authorized user on my accounts, those were getting canceled. Again, nothing vindictive about it. She wanted financial independence. And part of independence is managing your own credit, your own spending, your own financial decisions without relying on someone else's creditworthiness. And I pulled up our monthly expenses and created a detailed breakdown of exactly what it costs to maintain our current lifestyle: mortgage, utilities, insurance, groceries, everything. I divided it all based on our individual incomes, which meant she'd be responsible for about 30% of the household costs. Her friends thought 50-50 was unfair when incomes weren't equal. Fine, she could pay her proportional share and see how that worked out. By the time she wandered into the kitchen around 9, I had everything organized in a neat folder labeled Independence Plan. She looked confused when she saw me sitting there with papers spread out across the table. "What's all this?" she asked, pouring herself coffee. "Your freedom," I said, sliding the folder across to her. "I spent the morning thinking about what you said last night. And you're absolutely right. You deserve to experience what life would have been like if you'd followed your friend's advice." She opened the folder cautiously, like it might contain something dangerous. "What do you mean?" I'm giving you exactly what they told you to want. Financial independence, separate accounts, proportional bill paying, the whole package. No more joint anything, no more shared responsibilities, no more feeling trapped by our combined finances." She flipped through the papers, her expression getting more confused with each page. "This says you closed our joint credit cards." "Correction. I removed you as an authorized user from my credit cards. You're free to apply for your own cards now, build your own credit history, make your own financial decisions without any input from me." "But these monthly expenses," she said, holding up the breakdown I created. "This says I owe over $1,200 just for my share of the house costs. That's based on proportional income, which you said was the fair way to split things. Your income is about 30% of our combined income. So, you're responsible for 30% of our combined expenses. Math is beautiful that way." She stared at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. "I can't afford this. My salary doesn't leave room for $1,200 in house costs, plus my own food, gas, and everything else." I nodded sympathetically. "I know. That's probably why your friends suggested marrying someone who could cover all the major costs while anything you contributed would be considered a bonus. Unfortunately, you didn't follow that advice, so now you get to experience the alternative." "This is ridiculous," she said, but her voice lacked the conviction she'd had the night before. "You're being petty and vindictive." "Actually, I'm being helpful. You said you felt trapped in a marriage where you were expected to contribute equally when you weren't earning equally, so I fixed that. Now you're contributing proportionally, and you're free to make all your own decisions about how you spend your money." She sat down heavily in the chair across from me. "This isn't what I meant." "Then what did you mean?" "Because last night you gave me a very detailed list of everything that was wrong with our arrangement. This morning I fixed those problems. I thought you'd be grateful. I meant that things needed to improve, not that everything needed to be separated." I leaned back in my chair. "See, that's the interesting thing about advice. Your friends weren't telling you how to improve our marriage. They were telling you how to avoid being in our marriage in the first place. There's a difference." She was quiet for a long moment, still staring at the papers. "So, what happens now?" Now you get to experience all 7 pieces of advice simultaneously. You get to maintain your own apartment if you want one. You get to manage your own finances completely. You get to make decisions based on what you want, not what we want as a couple. You get to explore your options and figure out what you actually want from life. And what about us? She asked. What about us? According to you, there is no us. There's just you trapped in a pathetic marriage with someone who can't provide the life you deserve. Well, now you're not trapped anymore. She looked up at me then, and I could see something that looked like panic starting to creep into her eyes. You're talking like we're getting divorced. I'm talking like we're getting real about what this relationship actually is instead of what we've been pretending it is. You want to keep living here? Fine, but you'll be living here as an independent adult who pays her own way and makes her own decisions. You want to explore other options? Also fine. Your friends think you should have kept a backup plan. Now you can develop one without feeling guilty about it. She opened her mouth to argue, but I held up my hand. Before you say anything else, I want you to understand something. Last night wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't a request for changes or improvements. It was a verdict. You told me that our marriage was a mistake, that I wasn't good enough, and that you'd wasted 5 years of your life settling for mediocrity. Okay, message received. Now I'm responding to that verdict in the most helpful way I can think of. By ending our marriage, by giving you the freedom to end it yourself, if that's what you really want. Or to fix it, if that's actually possible. But either way, you'll be doing it as an independent person making your own choices, not as someone who feels trapped by circumstances. She stared at me for a long time. Finally, she asked, "What if I don't want this kind of independence?" I smiled. Then maybe you should have thought about that before you spent last night explaining to me exactly why our current arrangement was such a terrible mistake. 3 weeks into her new independence experiment, the house felt like a completely different place. Not better or worse necessarily, just different. We were basically roommates now, polite strangers sharing the same space while living completely separate lives. And let me tell you, reality was hitting her harder than a freight train on a Tuesday morning. The first week, she tried to maintain her usual spending habits while ignoring the new financial reality. Dinners out with friends, shopping trips, her monthly spa day, all the little luxuries that had been easy when she had access to my credit cards. By week 2, she was checking her bank balance obsessively and making increasingly creative excuses to avoid social activities that cost money. Week 3 brought the phone calls. I'd be working in my home office and hear her in the living room having increasingly desperate conversations with her advisory committee. The same friends who had been so generous with criticism of our marriage were suddenly very busy when she needed practical help. "Can't you just stay at my place for a few days while I figure this out?" I heard her ask one evening. Long pause.
"Oh, your mother-in-law is visiting right for 3 weeks. Of course."
Another call. "I know you said I should keep my own apartment, but I'm wondering if maybe I could crash on your couch until I find something." Another pause. "Your landlord doesn't allow overnight guests for more than 3 days. That's really specific." The best one was when she called the friend who had apparently been most vocal about the backup plan advice. "Remember when you said I should always have an exit strategy? Well, I'm ready to activate that strategy, and I was hoping—" Long pause. "You're seeing someone exclusively now, and it would be weird, but I thought you said relationships should always stay flexible." By the end of week 3, she was spending a lot of time staring at apartment listings on her laptop, and I could see her doing mental math that wasn't adding up the way she'd hoped. Turns out, when you're making $30,000 a year and trying to maintain the lifestyle you had when you were sharing expenses with someone making $70,000, the numbers get uncomfortable fast. The breaking point came on a Thursday evening. I was making dinner for myself when she walked into the kitchen and just stood there watching me cook. Not asking for anything, not saying anything, just standing there with this expression that looked like she was trying to solve a puzzle with half the pieces missing. "Smells good," she finally said. "Thanks. There's sandwich stuff in the fridge if you're hungry." "I'm not hungry," she said, but she kept standing there. "I've been thinking about what you said about giving me the freedom to fix things or end things." I kept stirring the pasta sauce, not looking at her. And I think maybe we rushed into this separation thing. Maybe we should have tried working on the problems instead of just dividing everything up. "What problems?" I asked. "According to you, the problem was that you married the wrong person. How exactly do you work on that without one of us becoming someone completely different?" She was quiet for a moment. "I didn't mean it the way it sounded." "You didn't mean what? That our marriage was pathetic? That you'd wasted 5 years? That I couldn't provide the life you deserved? Because you were pretty specific about all of that. I meant that I was frustrated. I meant that I was feeling stuck and didn't know how to express it properly. I turned to look at her then. So you expressed it by telling me that your friends think I'm inadequate and that you should have listened to their advice to never marry me in the first place. That's not what I said. Actually, that's exactly what you said. Word for word. I have a pretty good memory for conversations that change everything. She leaned against the counter, looking more deflated than I'd seen her since this whole thing started. I've been trying to find my own place, and everything in our price range is either terrible or way out in the suburbs. And the decent places want first month, last month, and a security deposit that's more than I make in 2 months. That does sound challenging, I said, turning back to my cooking. Have you considered getting a roommate? That's what most single people do when they can't afford to live alone. I don't want a roommate, she trailed off. I want to come home to someone who cares about me. I want to share dinner with someone who knows how my day went. I want to sleep next to someone who makes me feel safe and loved. I plated my dinner and sat down at the table. Those are all reasonable things to want. The question is whether you want them with me or whether you want them with someone who meets your friends. Criteria for an acceptable husband. I want them with you, she said quietly. Even though I'm ordinary and mediocre and can't provide the life you deserve, I didn't mean those things. Yes, you did. And you know what? That's okay. You're allowed to want more than what our marriage provides. You're allowed to think you settled for less than you deserved. You're allowed to regret the choices you made. But you're not allowed to take it back, just because living with the consequences turned out to be harder than you expected. She sat down across from me, and I could see her eyes getting watery. So that's it. You've just written off 5 years of marriage because of one bad conversation. I haven't written off anything. I've just stopped pretending that one bad conversation was an isolated incident. You've been unhappy for months, maybe years. You've been discussing our problems with your friends instead of with me. You've been comparing our life to some imaginary alternative that your advisory committee convinced you was possible. But people can change, she said. Marriages can improve. We can work on the problems. What problems specifically? Because the problems you outlined weren't things that could be fixed with counseling or better communication. They were fundamental incompatibilities between who I am and who you think I should be. She was quiet for a long time, staring at her hands. Finally, she looked up at me. What if I was wrong? What if I let my friends get in my head and convince me that I was settling when I actually had something good? I finished my dinner before answering. When I did, I kept my voice level and calm. Then you'll have learned an expensive lesson about the difference between advice and wisdom, and maybe next time you'll think twice before letting other people evaluate your marriage for you. Next time? She asked, and her voice cracked a little. Next relationship, I clarified. Because this one is over. Not because I'm angry or hurt or trying to punish you, but because you made it very clear that you don't respect what we built together and I have too much self-respect to spend the rest of my life trying to convince someone that I'm worth being married to. She started crying then. Not the angry tears from our fight 3 weeks ago, but the kind of crying that comes when you realize you've made a mistake that can't be undone. Please don't do this. Please don't give up on us. I stood up and cleared my plate. I'm not giving up on us. There is no us anymore. There's just you finally free to follow all 7 pieces of advice your friends gave you. And me finally free to find someone who doesn't need a committee to tell her whether I'm worth loving. The divorce papers were sitting on the kitchen table when she came downstairs Saturday morning. I'd had them prepared by a lawyer during the week. Nothing complicated since we'd already separated our finances and didn't have kids or major assets to fight over. Clean, simple, final. She saw them immediately and froze in the doorway. What are these? Your freedom papers, I said, not looking up from my coffee and newspaper. Everything you said you wanted, all official and legal. She picked them up with shaking hands. You can't be serious. Dead serious. I've been thinking about your situation all week, and I realized I hadn't given you my advice yet. You shared 7 pieces of advice from your friends, but I never got to contribute to the conversation. Your advice? She asked, sinking into the chair across from me. Just 1 piece, much simpler than 7, much easier to remember. I folded my newspaper and looked at her directly. Here it is. When you tell someone they're not good enough for you, believe them when they agree with you. Her face went pale. That's not what I meant. Of course it is. You spent an entire evening explaining exactly why I wasn't the husband you needed. why our marriage was a mistake, why you'd wasted years settling for mediocrity. Well, I listened. I agreed. And now I'm fixing the problem by divorcing me, by setting you free to find what you actually want, instead of staying trapped with what you don't want. You said yourself that you felt trapped in a pathetic marriage. Problem solved. She started crying again. But this time, I didn't feel the usual urge to comfort her. I made a mistake. I was angry and frustrated, and I said things I didn't mean. You said things you'd been thinking for months, maybe years. You said things your friends had been telling you to say. The only mistake you made was thinking I'd stick around to be your backup plan while you figured out whether you could do better. That's not fair. I stood up and refilled my coffee cup. Fair would have been having this conversation before you spent months complaining about me to your friends. Fair would have been working on our problems together instead of getting validation for your dissatisfaction from people who wanted to see us fail. They don't want to see us fail. Really. Because when you needed actual help these past few weeks, where were they? When you needed a place to stay or someone to help with expenses or even just emotional support, how available were your advisory committee? She didn't answer because we both knew the answer. The papers are straightforward, I continued. No alimony, no fighting over property, no drama. You get your complete independence. I get my self-respect back. Everybody wins. I don't want independence, she whispered. I want my husband back. Your husband was never good enough for you, remember? I'm just the guy who was convenient until something better came along. Well, now you're free to find that something better. She looked at me with desperation in her eyes. What if I fire my friends? What if I stop listening to their advice and start focusing on us? I almost smiled at that. You can't unfry an egg. You can't unsay words that came from months of resentment. And you definitely can't convince someone to stay married to you after you've spent an evening explaining why they're inadequate. People forgive worse things than this. People forgive mistakes made in anger. They don't forgive systematic campaigns to tear down their self-worth. There's a difference. She stared at the papers for a long time. So, this is really it. 5 years of marriage ends because of one bad night. 5 years of marriage ends because you decided it should end. I'm just making it official, and there's nothing I can say to change your mind. I looked at her one last time. This woman who had shared my bed and my life and my dreams for 5 years before deciding it wasn't enough. You already said everything that mattered. The only thing left is my response. She signed the papers that afternoon. By evening, she was packing her things. By Monday, she was gone. And for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe again.